Y'all, let me tell ya, this next story is one for the books. It's the kind that'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Picture this, it's the spring of 1859, and Captain William Banta sets out on a simple hunt with his friend, J. Harris. Just two fellas looking to bring home some venison. But what starts as a routine trip turns into a night of bone-chillin' cold, a wrong turn in the dark, and a run-in with something far more dangerous than a deer. So sit back, grab a warm cup of coffee, and settle in, 'cause you ain't gonna believe what Captain Banta found lurkin' in that cave.
It's spring of 1859. I was 32 years old, living on the Guadalupe River in Kerr County. That March, I decided to take a break from the routine and go on a hunt with my friend J. Harris. We set our sights on Wallace's Creek, about 15 miles south of Kerrville, a place we knew well. We left early in the morning and reached our favorite camping spot by noon. It was a good place, tucked up near the head of Wallace's Creek with plenty of game nearby. We staked our horses, brewed some coffee, and took our lunch. Afterward, we settled back, pipes in hand, stretching out our blankets as we discussed the evening hunt. The sky had been thick with clouds all day, and the air smelled of rain. We decided to split up. Harris would take the east, and I'd head west into the cedar-covered hills. Just before dusk, we parted ways, and I made my way into the rugged terrain, crossing deep canyons and shadowed draws, some 5 miles from camp. Not long into my trek, I spotted movement in a small glade. A handful of deer were grazing, unaware of my presence. I crouched low, inching closer, careful not to make a sound. Picking out a small buck, I took aim and squeezed the trigger. The crack of my rifle shattered the quiet, and as the smoke cleared, I saw my shot was true. The buck dropped where it stood, the rest scattering into the brush. As I reloaded, something every hunter learns to do fast. I caught sight of another deer about 80 yards off, standing still as if it hadn't figured out what just happened. Without thinking, I fired again. The doe bolted into the trees, but I knew I'd hit her. I quickly dressed the buck, then followed the blood trail, tracking her through the thick brush. The first few drops of rain started falling, and the wind shifted, blowing cold out of the north. I finally found the doe, lifeless in the undergrowth. Dragging her back to where I'd left the buck, I worked fast to dress them both, bundling the meat into cloth sacks. By then, the temperature had dropped sharply, the rain picking up, and I was soaked through. I figured it was time to get back to camp, but as I trudged along, the daylight faded fast. Before long, I realized I was turned around. The darkness pressed in, the wind howling through the trees, and the cold bit at my bones. I kept moving, hoping to stumble onto familiar ground. But the harder the rain fell, the more disoriented I became. By midnight, I gave up trying to find camp and started looking for shelter instead. Eventually, I came across a rock overhang. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep the worst of the rain off me. I gathered what I could find and coaxed a fire to life. Stripping off my wet clothes, I propped them up to dry, turning them now and then while I warmed myself by the flames. Exhausted, I finally drifted off to sleep. Sometime before dawn, a strange noise jolted me awake. It was low and guttural, echoing from somewhere behind me. Over the years, I'd learned to sleep light, out in the wild. Getting too comfortable could get a man killed. I grabbed a burning stick from the fire and held it up like a torch. The flickering light revealed something I hadn't noticed before. A dark hole in the rock wall behind me, a cave. And that noise? It was coming from inside. Now, I ain't one to spook easy, but something about that growl sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I had no business sticking around to see what was lurking in there, but at the same time, I wasn't about to take off blindly into the night. Then, before I could react, a deep, rumbling snarl sounded from outside. My gut clenched as I turned toward the entrance. In the dim light of the dying fire, I saw them, a pair of glowing eyes, locked right onto me. I reached for my rifle, steadying myself as best I could. I pulled the trigger, click, misfire. Before I could cap it again, a massive shape lunged toward me. The beast barreled through the fire, knocking me flat, its growls filling the cave. I barely had time to roll away before it was gone, disappearing into the darkness beyond. My heart hammered in my chest, and let me tell you, I wasn't cold anymore. The rest of that night, I sat by the fire, wide-eyed and listening to the wind, rain, and those deep, haunting growls echoing from the cave. I wasn't scared, mind you, but I sure as hell had urgent business elsewhere. When daylight finally came, I wasted no time getting out of there. I wandered until I heard the crack of a rifle off in the distance. I fired back, signaling Harris, and within the hour, we were reunited. He led me back to camp, where I finally got some hot coffee and dry clothes. After breakfast, we decided there was no way we were leaving without figuring out what, exactly, had chased me out of that cave. Later that morning, we rode out, determined to track the thing down. It took us most of the day, but by late afternoon we found the cave entrance. Not wanting to go in blind, we scouted around and located another opening further down. We could hear movement inside, low and steady. Cautiously, we stepped inside. The cave widened as we went, the darkness swallowing us whole. Then, out of nowhere, a deep, rolling growl. I didn't stick around to see what made it. Neither did Harris. We turned and bolted for the entrance. He made it out first, but just as I neared the opening, my foot caught on a rock, and I went down hard. Before I could scramble to my feet, something massive came charging out of the darkness, right over me. The breath whooshed from my lungs as I hit the ground, and by the time I looked up, I heard Harris's rifle crack. The bear, a massive sow, staggered but didn't stop. Wounded and angry, it turned back toward the cave, straight at me. This time I was ready. With my knife in hand, I braced myself as the beast lunged. I don't recall much of what happened next, just the chaos of fur, teeth, and instinct. I slashed and stabbed, and by the time I rolled free, Harris had landed another shot. The bear stumbled, collapsing near feet in the cave entrance, right on top of me. After a whole lot of cussing and shoving, I finally managed to wriggle free. Sore, battered, and covered in dirt, I stared at the lifeless beast before us. We looped a rope around its hind leg, dragging it out of the cave to get a better look. It was an old bear, mean and scarred from years of surviving in those hills. By the time we loaded up our horses with venison and the bear meat, the sun was already sinking low. We mounted up and headed for home, satisfied we had faced whatever had been lurking in that cave. And let me tell you, since that day, I've had no interest in exploring dark places. If I so much as see a cave now, I tip my hat and keep on riding. Some mysteries just ain't worth solving.
Well, y'all, that wraps up Chapter 6 of 27 Years on the Texas Frontier, the real-life adventures of my 4x great-granddaddy, Captain William Banta. But don't go riding off just yet. There's plenty more wild frontier tales where that came from. If you love hearing about the grit, danger, and downright unbelievable stories of early Texas, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.